Hello everybody and welcome to the C64 Brain YouTube channel. If you can excuse my long recess, I just eventually decided that I need to finish this video series to stay the course. I mean, what's the point of starting a series and never having an ending, right? It's kind of like starting a race and quitting before the end goal is in sight. Anyway, we could have a long discussion, but opinions aside, let's get down to it. For those who may be catching up for the first time, we are now exploring the Commodore 64 game project, video 16 out of 18 in total, to show the insides of a game engine that was handed to me down back in 2017. I didn't really have any understanding vaguely then what was going on, but eventually I was determined enough to sort through the logic and created a working version. And of course, this video series was born from that. So let's get down to it. For this session in video 16, we will be learning how a title screen can be designed in CharPad and placed on your screen using the Vice emulator. So kind of giving you a history of the title screens for the Commodore 64 here. In general, title screens draw attention to game players to make it appealing enough to purchase a game. Now, I can recall back in the days walking through Sears store and seeing some amazing Commodore 64 titles on display that at times really encouraged me to pull out my wallet and make a financial exchange, since I was often inspired just by the amazing art alone at that time. And here's an example of some Commodore 64 title screens that I found that are used for this type of fancy display to grab the interest of the player. And one in particular that I fell in love with was Dragon's Lair. I don't know if you guys ever seen that one, but it was basically at that time it was a promo that was going on with a game series on television, and eventually Commodore 64, jumped onto it because everybody else was, designing their own version of it, and it was basically just like going through a castle. You were Dirk the Daring, and you had to go through these little adventures, whatever. And in that same thing in the Commodore 64, you kind of do the same thing. You have to kind of move the joystick in kind of weird positions just to kind of get through it and stuff like that and complete some challenging tasks. But it was pretty cool. And it has a really nice title screen, as you can see, or like a little castle in the background overlooking, a forest. Okay, so another one, although I never owned this actual title, was Defender of the Crown for the Commodore 64. This one's actually pretty cool too, but you basically have a little series, kind of like very similar to the Dragon's Lair. You actually have a series of events you have to complete to get through each session, of course, where you're fighting knights and you're jousting and stuff like that. So this one's really interesting as well. And it's got some pretty nice graphics in it. Another one, again, I did not actually own, was the C64 Maniac Mansion, which you can see the screenshot here. Now, I never really got to play this game in general, even though I've never really owned it or even tried it online more recently since the evolution of the internet. And I guess I will probably find some time to look into it. I think I probably dabbed into it one time, but I didn't really try to get through it. It was a little confusing. You're walking around these houses or whatever, and you're trying to discover what's going on, I guess, with your friends or whatever. I don't really know, but I know it's a pretty interesting game by Lucasfilm. So, 1987. Okay, this other one is G.I. Joe, which was really interesting too. G.I. Joe was pretty popular then. I believe they had a cartoon in the 80s or whatever, and I think they also had like a lot of little toys out for the G.I. Joe and stuff like that. So they eventually came up, Commodore 64 adapted into some kind of a video game. And this one has a lot of series that you go through too. It's actually pretty cool. You actually got interactions where you can just drive around like I think it's like a tank or a Jeep or whatever, and you're shooting people up. And you can also switch over to a man where you're just running a sprite guy around on the screen. Different kinds of missions involved. So that one has a really nice title screen in general. Straight this project to show before starting the game demo. And you can see a screenshot here I have of it. It's got like a hotel environment. You see some couches and stuff like that, and some upper area to a restaurant. So I just wanted to kind of show you some of the things that you'll see going on in the videos. I know you've seen a lot of my older graphics and stuff like that. Now it's basically reusing a lot of tiles that were out there, but I spent some time dabbing into really graphics, and I've got some exciting things to show you more about the graphics coming. Okay, now in order for a Commodore 64 disk image to be recognized as having the ability to load a character set, which is what you'll do to be able to create a screen on your Commodore 64 and Vice emulator, we have to set up the low and high bytes areas in the sectors first. Now there is a tool that was actually referred to me. It's called Disk Doctor, written in BASIC, which allows you to create a section on the disk where you can insert 2 bytes before the end of each individual first name, known as the loader, that will recognize where in memory the kernel loader will grab the data from that will be used with your program. Now you see an example screenshot here from Disk Doctor, and it displays several file names here: hotelchars.bin, hotel4tiles.bin, alley4chars.bin, hotel1@trib.bin, hotel4tiles.bin, allkeyschars.bin, and of course house2forchars.bin. Should they all be on the screen to see those there. The 2 bytes immediately before this represent the low and the high bytes of where that file will be loaded into memory. In our example seen here, or here, it will be at 4800, which is decimal for 18432, and 4801, which is 18433. So you need these 2 different bytes to be set before the disk file, just like back in the days you actually had to write these to the disk in general, to a floppy disk, which have a floppy disk that I actually show you right now, which I do actually have one. So here's an example of a floppy disk for those who may not know. So they call it floppy because you kind of, it flops actually, it just flops. So anyways, the floppy disk could be set up that way. By setting up the individual sectors on the disk, you were able to go ahead and write these 2 bytes. As I mentioned, they basically control the start address of where you can load things into memory. In this example, we're loading in a character set, so we want to be able to grab the character set. And the reason for this, which you'll probably see more apparent in this video, is not only can you just grab one, but you could grab another character set, and so on. So you could basically be going from one screen to the next and switching over by reading the disk to get a whole new graphics area, a whole new entire environment. So this actually allows a lot more appeal to games, and a lot of people out there are doing this now with their games, I imagine. And this is a technique I picked up online through Lemon64 with the wonderful community there. So now it's time to take a deep dive and learn how to load a CharPad title screen from a disk image in the Vice emulator. The first part of the routine assigns an area of memory at 4802, as we talked about, 18434, to load the character set into that makes up the graphics for the title screen. We also need the file length, which is important to properly load the bytes into memory. Now, a failure to do this, as I discovered, leads to the screen not being loaded into memory. The file underscore table low high variable constant, so there's 2 of them, will read the file name that exists on the disk image. And there's a function I have here which I created called load chset from disk, which can select which title screen to load, or in this example, which map to load into the Commodore 64's character set memory. There's also variables ADDR low and ADDR high, and these are used to load the character sets from our pointers, and the kernel is checked at FFD5 for any errors when loading a file in case something should go wrong with the loading. The rest of the code will execute the set name, which sets the correct file name to be loaded, and set LFS, which selects the device. Now we could have also used inc.bin, example titlescreen.bin, to load in a title screen as well. But I wanted to show you this example because we can, like I said, we can use the inc.bin if we want as a demonstration, but that's going to limit you to only being able to load in that title screen or that map alone. I was using it to load my maps and my sprites and whatever, but then you're limited because now when you want to load another map, you can't do that, But with this example from the disk image, you can actually dump that one and then pull another one out, dump that one and pull another one out. Like I said, you'll be seeing so many more graphics as a result of this until you fill up your disk, of course. But, compression and all that can take care of that for you as well in this time and age. Now, I also wanted to include here a basic program example that accomplishes the same task of reading the low and high bytes from the disk sectors. as we've seen in the book here as an example, tricks and tips for the Commodore 64 on page 158 by Vasquez Software. You can see I have the basic program up here for lines 100 through 150. And first we were getting the input. Basically, we're reading to get the name of the file, and then we're opening up that file name with our string of n strings, and then we're setting the program file. Now pay attention to lines 130. You'll see a print number 10, CHR string 0, and CHR string 17. If you look after that, the comment says start address 1100 in this example. So what this is doing, as I mentioned earlier, is taking those low and those high bytes to those two individual bytes that are set up to read in the proper area of memory, as we mentioned earlier, to load in the character set or wherever you want it, whether it's a file or like a sprite being loaded in memory. You can use it to set right at the beginning of that disk area, which is right before the file name, which I showed you in the disk doctor example. And then from there, once it's written to the disk, it'll recognize it as a start address. By running the kernel, you're going to be able to get those files to load into memory and get your graphics on the screen. And of course, here it just shows you the arrow channel being checked as well and closing the file out. So now you are looking at the assembly language code that accomplishes the same thing we've been talking about all along. So we talked earlier about the function load ch set from disk, but now you can see it here in detail with the code we have here. So we are taking and loading the low and the high bits from a table and reading these into variables that will store the file names for the title screen that you see here, which I put this in example. You can create whatever title screen you want, but I have this one just created for the parkour example that we're using for this series. But you can obviously add many other screens and create your own with, just create them in CharPad or whatever. The file length table is necessary so that we know the total bytes of the file name. A failure, as discussed earlier, to not include this or provide the wrong length will result in the file not being found. Now, I can't tell you how long I spent painfully learning about this until eventually being able to get to read the file from this successfully. Okay, and that wraps it up for this Commodore 64 game series for Project Video 16, which is the title screens. We discussed the history of the Commodore 64 title screens in general, how to design maps using the CharPad tool, maybe not designing them, but just talking about it, because we have other videos that obviously do that, and creating a disk image loader. And we finally reviewed the code that is used to create the title screen for a project example, which I showed you the basic example and I showed you the regular code example. So you can go ahead and check out the GitHub. I'll have the code and everything uploaded here where you can kind of see the next stages in this project. So bear with me also because I'm actually right now currently working on finishing videos 17 and 18 as well.